tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to continue from the place where we stopped. Yes, last time we discussed about the relationship between Chittarupas and the wrong view of a doer, Karaka Ditti. And we stopped in a place where we analyzed whether Chetana could be a self, or is it connected to a self, or is it something other than the self. In this regard, according to the Buddhist teachings, Theravada teachings, Chetana is not a self, and Chetana is neither self, nor it is connected with any self. So today we are going to analyze that further, as I said last week. Till then, we'll just recap what we have done, because it is clear that actions do take place according to our intention, and it is very rare that something that we do not intend takes place. There are sometimes uncontrollable events taking place in some people's bodies when there are some cognitive or neuro imbalances, chemical imbalances in the brain, but those are considered as sickness. But for ordinary beings, it's very clear to us, according to folk psychology, we intend and we do the actions, and the actions and the intentions do correlate. We don't see much huge disparities between them. Then this would obviously lead to the idea that there is a governing self within the body or associate in the body which has control over the verbal and physical activities that are taking place based on the body, we will be using the body. So this has led to establish a doctrine of self, a doctrine of a doer, which is related to self, and even in the doctrinal level and also in the emotional level. Even the ones who are Buddhist still believe in a self who is doing the activities, wholesome and unwholesome, based on this obvious, visible relationship. So now, when we look into this action taking place, like activities according to the Theravada perspective, we would say Chetanas arise, and with their arising, Chittarupas would also arise, and they will be modified according to the nature of the Chetana, intention of the Chetana, and due to the modification of Chittarupas, done by intimation, vinyatti, the actions take place according to the Chetana. So we have three different realities coming into play: Chetana, Chittarupa, and Vinyatti. Vinyatti is not an ultimate reality, but we can still consider it as a reality. Then the entire body starts to behave, either to act physically or to speak verbally. Now, then this shows that there's no self which is acting as a single entity as we believe, but it's a function of combination of many realities coming into play. Now, each and every reality is a rising and falling phenomena, and they do not last for long as we expect in a self, because the most integral feature of a self, the peculiar or the most imperative feature of a self, is the remaining as a one entity for a longer period. That is the most imperative feature, the most significant feature in the self. Because throughout our entire life, we didn't have two capital I's. We do have eyes with which we see, but we don't have two capital I's, which we signify as myself. That means we have been existing as the same entity throughout the life, and that entity will one day die. And some believes it would transmigrate or to move to another life, and some believe that I would end up in at the end of the death, at the end of the life, and end of this life. So the most significant feature is the self lasting as a one entity for a longer period. But according to Theravada doctrine, all the entities, such as the Chetana, Chitta Rupas, Viññatti, and even the entire body, which is made out of Kalapas. All these realities rise and fall and pass away. The Rupas in the Kalapa rise and fall and pass away. So none of them are existing for a longer period. They are all momentarily. So it's very difficult to advocate or recognize something which is momentary as a self, because the most significant feature of self is lasting, enduring for a longer period as a one single entity. It may undergo change, but its main essence would not go into disappearance. So it would not vanish. The main essence remains even with some change undergoing. That is okay. That is undergoing change, enduring change is not an issue for the self doctrine, as long as the essence remain. But if the essence is rising and vanishing and arising newly, and if new essence are arising, then it is a contradiction to the self, because the idea of self, it is a very clear defined fact. The self has to be one entity throughout the time. It's not that we are dying and being born all the time. I have been living this life for this entire period. So the momentariness is contradicting with the idea of self. That is the gateway to the self doctrine, the momentariness. And this momentariness is also opens to two other notions, which would say things are out of control because it doesn't happen, things doesn't take place as we wish. The things that have a momentary existence would eventually arise due to causes and eventually vanish due to the natural phenomena undergoing the natural process. And then, so it means they are out of the control. It is they themselves doesn't have any control, and someone else also cannot have any say about them. Then there is no such unchanging essence going through or throughout the time. That is also a fact in itself. So we call it the absence of an essence, sara. Asara bhavena. Sara is missing. So therefore, this momentariness is the key to the non-self doctrine. Then the Theravadians would say Chetana is neither a self nor it is associated with a self. But the question that arises is, if the actions are taking place, according to the will or intention of the person, conceptually speaking, the person, and actions and if the actions and the Chetana do match with each other, then how could we advocate the doctrine of non-selfness, because we can see an obvious correlationship between the Chetana and the action. And if the actions are under the control, that means there is a controlling agent within ourselves, which we can term as the self, because another very important feature of Chetana, of self, is it has the governing power. It can govern or it can control, it has a say or about the mind and the body. So the body can behave according to the self, and also the person can think according to the mind, according to the self, think according to the self. So that's why whenever we want to shift our attention to a specific thing, we can do it at our will. We can do it at our will. So when we can do actions at our will, and we can think at our will or speak what we want, so it shows that there is a governing agent, which we call the katta. Katta means kattru, a person who is a doer is there. And that doer is not merely a doer, it has the governing, it is in control of these activities. As a person who owns a car can ride it as he likes. In the same way, the self which is living in this body or upon this body, wherever it is, has the say or control over the body and the mind. And it will govern or regulate all the activities it does. So this is the main idea of the self view. So sorry, I'm having a bit of a cough and some phlegm in the lungs these days. So it's a small infection. So then how the Theravadians took this approach? So for that we equalized, either the Chetana has to be self or Chetana should be something other than the self. These were the two approaches we made. So I'll go to that. We'll try to explain that notion. Self, Chetana and self are the same. That was the first approach. And Chetana, identical, right? Not equal, is identical, we say. The Chetana and self are not identical. But then we talked about Chetana and self inseparable. Inseparable. Then we have Chetana and self separable. Okay, these are the three approaches. Now, we could say evaluation. Evaluating the self and Chetana. They are co-relationship. How could a self could exist while Chetana? Because the existence of Chetana, we cannot deny that. It is a subjectively felt thing, experience that we have, because everyone has the intention to do some action. So if we deny that, then there is going to be there is nothing to talk about then. It's like denying the existence of the consciousness, because we cannot deny the fact that we are thinking, because even thinking, whether the thinking is there, negates that idea. When you are thinking or when you are pondering or when you are investigating whether there is a chitta or not, that act itself negates the question, because otherwise what would you would be doing? So thinking is always there. Thinking is always there. There is a doctrine called nihilism, which is not very popular in the epistemological viewpoint. There are ethical nihilism, there are epistemological nihilism, but metaphysical nihilism is something very unpopular. Only, to my knowledge, I would not say only, but Madhyamikas advocated such a metaphysical nihilism, saying that there is no intrinsic natures in the world and only Nibbana exists, and this everything is an illusion. But the obvious question comes is, in order to produce an illusion, there should be something. How could something happen out of nothing? That's the biggest thing. So, but that is the entire basis of the physics, today's physics, because Big Bang happened out of, normally they say it happened out of nothing, because all the matter and antimatter come into collision, they would nullify, and it would be a singularity where we cannot advocate is something as there. But I'm not very perfect in explaining the singularity, but to my knowledge, some scientists say that it came out of nothing, right? There was so everything happened out of nothingness. So anyway, we cannot deny the fact of Chetana, because Chetana is existing, that's for sure. The point is, we have to evaluate, we have to verify whether the self exists or not. If self, now we can have three possibilities. We can completely identify self with Chetana. This identification is numerical identification, which equalizes Chetana with the self in all the aspects. When two things are identical, all the features that are present in Chetana should be present in self. All the features present in self should be present in Chetana. This is called Lisbon's theory in modern philosophy. So Lisbon's theory is all the Lisbon's or Limbon's, I forgot the exact pronunciation. So all the features, if two things are identical, I mean numerically identical, they should possess the same features. Even if they are qualitatively identical, for example, take about identical two books. they are identical in similar, and they are similar, and they seems to be sharing the same features, but they are not numerically identical. If something is numerically identical, it has to be the book. The book itself is the book. So even two entities which share the similar things are identical qualitatively, but not numerically. Numerically means they are fully identical. They are the same thing. So if Chetana is the self, and Chetana and self, this is a we call necessity argument. Chetana and self has to be the same thing. But the thing was, what we discussed was, now we can observe, we can practically or directly observe that the Chetana rises and vanishes. We cannot negate that fact, because intention to do something is differs from the based on the activity. And we also know, while we are asleep, all the intentions as we think about the physical, verbal, mental activity ceases. There is no intention while we are sleeping. We are not aware of that. According to Abhidhamma, there is the Bhavanga Chitta, and Bhavanga Chitta does have Chetana, and cognition is taking place. We just forget about that. We'll just ignore that fact. But in our day-to-day activities, when you are thinking very practically, we know that while asleep and while we are unconscious, Chetana ceases or doesn't take place. In the same way, we have to understand, when we are doing two different activities, one after another, the intention to do that particular activity ceases when we are involved in the other activity. Otherwise, we will not be able to perform that properly. And the Chetana, the intention is completely, solely involved or focused on that particular activity. So now, when Chetana rises and falls, if the self is identical with Chetana, obviously it has to come logically. It is impossible that the self would outlive Chetana. So this would lead to the idea that self also has to rise and fall, and self also has to vanish. And this contradicts with the main doctrine of the self, the foremost feature of self, that is enduring and lasting for a longer period as a one entity. And this rising and falling is happening within one life, because at least the self has to last for one life. Though some believe the self would vanish at the end of the death, and some believe the self would continue after death, and some believe a self would vanish, a single self would vanish at the end of the death, and another self would arise based on the karmas that were done by the previous self. That's called parankatan dukkha. Someone is now, that is also one of the Uchcheda ditthis. The view is, for example, if I take myself, this myself is experiencing happiness and suffering. Overall is a suffering going on in the world, even though there is some happiness involved in it. In the overall sense, we are undergoing a lot of sankhara dukkha's and also certain hardships. So all these suffering are because I was born, this self was produced, let's say this self originated. And what was the cause for the origin of this self? And that was a karma. And that was done by another self, which was my previous life. And that self had a different identity, or it was a different person, and the person who did those karmas would vanish at the end, because his identity would not continue, and a new identity would appear, and that person is now, myself is suffering. And what karmas I will be doing, another person who will be born in the next life will be suffering, will be experiencing. Now, due to those karmas. So that is quite bit closer to Buddhist teachings, because Buddhism doesn't advocate a self traveling throughout the lives or enduring all the lives that one is born into. But the thing is, there is no self arising at each life according to Buddhism. According to Buddhism, Nama Rupas are arising, and the Nama Rupa lineage continues. So that's why it changes. Because even in Buddhism, even in Theravada doctrine, character would change dramatically sometimes from life to life. For example, a person, now even I myself who is giving this doctrine, unfortunately, if I happen to be an animal next life, I wish it would not happen, but if it happens to be, if I happen to be an animal, I would never be able to understand these lectures that I delivered myself. So because I would have a completely different identity based on the karma which gave the birth. So therefore, even in Theravada doctrine, we have various characteristics present in various lives. So obviously when someone is looking into the past lives with the psychic powers, would feel like when they look that I had the person, or person, even if the person who is looking into the past life sees his past life, I had a different characteristic 10 lives ago, and in the ninth life from now, I was an animal and had completely different features, different figures, different appearance, and different thought patterns. And then suddenly he became another species animal, was born in another species, and it had also different features. And suddenly he became a human and deva or a brahma. So he obviously sees there are different features in the person, characteristics, and that could easily lead to the idea new selves are born according to the life. So that is also a possible grasping or a notion that one can go into, and therefore, but still the point I wanted to emphasize is, even someone takes the life, the self endures the death and continues after death, or if someone says the self ends at the death and everything is done by after that, or if it gives rise to another self, in all these three doctrines of Sassata Ditti and Uchcheda Ditti, they are talking about a self which endures at least one life. That's the point here. The doctrine of Uchchedavada doesn't advocate a self lasting throughout the samsara. So it talks about the vanishing of the self. But still it has the view that the self has existed throughout this entire life. So that is the main feature of self. For one life, the self has to maintain its identity. Identity means its personality. It's one thing, oneness should be there. But when we equalize, when we identify Chetana with self, and when the Chetana's rising and falling is obvious, what happens is that would obviously lead to the logical notion that self also has to rise and fall. So then it contradicts with the main idea that the self is lasting throughout the at least birth and at death. So this and this would contradict, because we see Chetanas rising and falling. If three Chetanas arose and passed away, three selves arose and passed away, and these three selves, because we see the Chetanas are completely different, they have different objects, they have different feeling, they have different capacities. So otherwise you cannot say the same thing rose and passed away. That would not be much practical, because you can observe there are new Chetanas happening, and Chetana, the nature of the Chetanas do change over time. The intentions we had as a child is different when we are young, when we are in the middle age, when we have gone old and close to death. We have different Chetanas. So therefore, it means when we see the differences in Chetana, we see if Chetana is the self, there should be new selves. So, and that contradicts with this notion of a self that we believe in. So then this would not be a practical approach. That's should be negated. Then what happens is Chetana and self are inseparable. Chetana and self are not identical. They are not identical means they are two different things. So it is possible that, because the issue which came here is when Chetana and self are numerically identical, when Chetana passes away, the self also has to pass away. Now here Chetana and self are not identical, so there is a possibility that the self would outlive the Chetana. The self would outlive the Chetana. Now then we have two other possibilities deriving from this possibility. That is to say, Chetana and self are two different things, but they are inseparable. Inseparable means they are existing as a one unit. So they have a very close relationship. So Chetana is associated in the self. So it is possible to say that they are associating the self. So Chetana and self, even though technically they are two different realities, which still we can say Chetana is having a self, and it is an integral part of the Chetana, of the self. It's an integral part of the self. So inseparably connected. So the thing is, even here, since because of the inseparability, rising and falling of Chetana is obvious. That is something that we practically see. So since Chetana and self are inseparable, what is the meaning of inseparability? Inseparable means one cannot exist without the other. That is the meaning of inseparability. So if Chetana is rising and falling and self is connected to it, it's two different things, but they are still acting as a one unit. So they may share some similar features. Such as the best example is Rūpa Kala. Patavi and Apo, Tejo, they all have 4 different characteristics. Patavi, Apo, Tejo, Vayu. But they share the same space. They do a function together. They perform function having mixed together. So they are a one unit acting together. So we could say Patavi has Apo, Apo has Tejo. Technically, we can speak like that because they are sharing the same space and they are sharing delimited in the same way, and they are acting as a one unit. So if Chetana and self are inseparably connected, there is a possibility that we might say Chetana and self are not the same thing. So Chetana, self is having a Chetana, and so the falling away of Chetana, the self could still be something apart, so the rising and passing away of Chetana would not matter much. But the problem is the inseparability. Inseparability in definition, by definition, says one cannot exist without the other. That's why they are called inseparable. So we have to define the inseparability first. So now if Chetana is passing away, obviously the logical outcome would be the self that is inseparably connected to it would also pass away. So that's the outcome. So then it will lead to the same problem. Why? How could selves vanish and arise momentarily while it should be something, a single entity throughout the entire life. Then Chetana and self, we can go to a separable thing. So they are separated. Either they are located in 2 different places, or maybe they are located upon one another, like the pen on my hand. But they are 2 different entities. Yes, that was the thing that we established from the beginning. And here they were inseparable. Here they are separable. So what happens is when they are separable, the one can exist without the other. One can exist without the other. So there would be a time when the Chetana is missing. For example, in the Nirodha Samapatti, on the Asanya Satta, or whatever possibility, there's a possibility the self may lack Chetana. The self may lack Chetana. And another point would be the self itself, I would say. The self itself lacks Chetana, because Chetana would be something connected to it, but not an integral part of it. Not like in this case. Here, Chetana, we can say that Chetana was a part of the self because they were a one unit, were one single unit that existed together. But here, they are, even though they exist together, means they are existing at like Chakku Pasada, like Chakku Viññāna is associated in Chakku Pasada, or maybe physically they are, or location wise, whatever, they are connected to each other, or they are far away from each other. Whatever it is, they are not, Chetana is not an integral part of the self. So what happens is Chetana, self becomes intentionless. Self becomes intentionless. Then the question comes, could we ever call something which lacks intention as the self? Because that's another practical issue. Because when we talk about self, we always has to bring the cognition into it. Now, there are doctrines in which they believe that Rūpa is a self. There are some doctrines, but Buddha's logical argument, the obvious argument Buddha brought in Mahanidana Sutta was that could something like Rūpa, which has no Chetana, achetana, which doesn't have any intention, which doesn't have an urge to act, could it be? Can you call it a self? Because it's very impractical. Could something that doesn't, the Mahanidana argument was Vedana. Could something that doesn't feel, exist, can be considered as a self? That's this argument to Venerable Ananda. So surely Ananda said cannot, because logically it's not possible. It's like the modern problem of problem in mind-body problem. How could some particles have the content? How could particles have a content or an object, in other words? So how could something have a qualia? How particles could feel? So this seems not practical at all, because they are two the mental substances or mental properties and physical properties seems to be completely drastically different from each other. So in the same way, how could something which doesn't have the intention or doesn't have feeling or any other emotion, mental, subjective feelings or any experience could be termed as a self? So if we take this path, the problem would be Chetana would be lacking, even though it is associated. Like for example, I am wearing a robe, but still robe is not one of my parts. I can still be without the robe. I can still be naked. So in the same way, the Chetana could be, the self could be without Chetana. So how could something without Chetana, be a self? That's the point here. That's the point here. So even that's the Buddha's argument, and even while the Chetana is taking place, it seems like, because even I am wearing my clothes, I am wearing my robes. Robes are not my. I am robeless in the actual sense, because I am not having a robe within myself for sure. So even the Chetana is acting in according to this doctrine. Chetana is something else from the self. Something else from the self. So self in the end becomes intentionless. So that would also violates the practical notion about the self. So these were the things that we talked, and I'll go through the part that I'm going to talk today. So if we take Chetana and self as two distinct entities, because this one is very clear. Yeah. So I'll read from the 2.445. The next counter question would be, it is clear that Chetana alone cannot perform actions. However, is that sufficient to establish the doctrine of non-self? Is it not possible that the self performs the actions when one relevant factors are present? Can't we say just, yes, Chetana alone cannot perform the actions, so self alone cannot perform the actions, it needs the support of others. So what is the problem? What is the issue here? Everyone is aware that beings get the intention to act. No one has doubt about that. Ordinary people believe that it is the self that has the intention. That's how normal people believe. They refer to this self as a living being, soul, me, whatever. It is interesting to investigate whether this intention to act and the assumed self are two things or the same. When analyzing, one must not forget the fact that intention for each act vanishes together with that act itself. That is a very important premise here. Then this is evident to all of us. The intention of raising the hand up is not present when putting down the hand. Therefore, it must be kept in mind that every volition disappears as soon as the action is done. This is the premises one. This is a solid thing, and this is through observation. This idea comes with we come to this conclusion or these premises with the observation, direct observation. It is a subjective one, it's an introspective one, but still I don't think anyone would deny this fact. Then if the Chetana and self are same, when the volition vanishes, the self must also vanish together with it, as there is no dichotomy between the two. There is no dichotomy, and it's numerically identical. That's the point here. So Lisbon's theory. So if one feature, if two are identical, they should have the same features, and they should be the same. There's no argument about that. They should be the same. So dichotomy between the two. But the public would not accept this notion. It is obvious that the intention to act disappears together as soon as the act is done. We don't need together here. But the person who performed the act outlives the action. The self stays after the volition has vanished. That is what we observe. Therefore, considering volition and self to be identical, numerically identical, seems not a practical approach. It is not a practical approach at all. Then, if we take Chetana and self as two different entities, it is possible for the self to live even after the volition has vanished. How could this idea be analyzed further? So that's what even Descartes said, the substance dualism. So he could imagine, he could assume, he could distinctly, clearly perceive that this mind could live without the body. Mind could live without the body. That is called property dualism. Substantial dualism. The difference between substances and properties are, now in a substance, a substance could live without the other. It has its own existence. So the mind as a substance matter is a substance. The matter can live without mind. It's obvious to all of us. And then, except for the panpsychists who believe that there is consciousness in every element. So then the mind could live without the body, because he could think, he could define himself as thinking, and he couldn't perceive him without thinking, without like the feature of thinking. And that was his argument. So the two property, if there are two substances, they could live, even they are depending on each other, they could live without each other. That's the point here. Theravada Buddhism is slightly different, because mind cannot exist without the body, and body cannot exist without the mind in ordinary conditions. In an extreme condition, when the mind is developed to a very higher level, there are two possibilities. In 5 realms, we have 4 realms in which mind exists without the body, and 1 realm in which body, animate body, not a non-living body, an animate living body existing without the consciousness. And also, while in the spiritually developed beings can attain into a state where the mind doesn't exist while the body is existing. So these are the 6 different occasions where mind and body could exist without each other, especially we are talking the animate world. So it's slightly different from the substance dualism, because in all the other places, mind needs the support of the body, and body to live, it needs the support of the mind. So then property dualism means they are properties of the same thing. For example, just for an example, if you take a Rūpa Kalapa as a substance or a thing, if you take it as a thing, in our doctrine, we don't take it as a thing, for example. There is a way you can take it, but anyway, so at a substance dualism, if you take something as a one thing, and the Patavi hardness is a one feature, and Apo is a one feature, Tejo is another feature. So these 3 features are existing in the same property, same substance, and they cannot, the hardness cannot exist without the Kalapa. Apo cannot exist without the Kalapa, Tejo cannot exist without the Kalapa, Vayu cannot exist without the Kalapa. So that is the property one. So property dualism says that consciousness is and consciousness meant there are in a living being there are 2 properties, physical properties and mental properties. So they are the same properties of the 2 properties of the same thing. So it leads to determinism in the end. Anyway, so that's the difference. So if self and because what we feel, that's the point here. We feel like the self is outliving the action. We feel like self is outliving the action, outliving the volition. Because even the volition vanishes, self remains to continue to remain. So therefore, this idea cannot be practically accepted. Then if Chetana and self are 2 distinct elements, we can explain their relationship in 2 ways. What happens? If there are 2 distinct elements, either we can say, either we can say they are the properties of the same thing, 2 properties of the same thing, because they are existing together as of one entity. Chetana, self is there, Chetana is there, then property dualism, for example. Or we can say there are 2 entities that are existing at the same place, with inseparably, right? Inseparably. This is called Eka Desa Lakkana Katanyatha. Eka Desa Lakkana Katanyatha. Eka Desa Lakkana Katanyatha. So this means though the Chetana and self exist together, they manifest or possess distinct intrinsic natures. This sentence should be reversed actually, better to say in another way. Though Chetana and self manifest or possess distinct features, they exist together, inseparably. As Rupas in the same Kalapa, which share the same space and are practically inseparable, are distinct in their intrinsic nature. According to this idea, Chetana are self, which exist together inseparably. Chetana and self, not and self, which exist together inseparably, have different intrinsic nature. Chetana and self have different intrinsic nature, but they exist together. Even according to this idea, when Chetana disappears, self too has to vanish. When a single reality among those which are inseparable vanish, then rest too has to vanish due to their inseparability. That's the point here. If they are inseparable, by definition, one vanishes, the other has to go into extinction. This leads to the same issue of self vanishing together with the chetana, which cannot be acceptable as the previous case. Then desantara kata anyata, desantara kata anyata. Desantara. Desantara kata anyata. Desantara means in different place. Eka desa means one place. Lakkana kata anyata. Characteristics are different. Lakkana kata anyata. Eka desa means in one place. Desantara means in a different place. Kata anyata. So they are made different. They are made different due to being in different locations. So they are two different things. Ekadesa lakkana katanyata means they are in one place, but they are different. Their difference is made by their characteristics. In this case, when they are inseparable, they are in the same place. Ekadesa lakkana katanyata. Anyata means their dissimilarity, difference is made by their characteristics. So these realities possess different chetana and self possess different characteristics. So they are different, but they are in the same place. Desantara katanyata means forget about their characteristics. They are made two different things because they are in different locations. So there's nothing to say about characteristics. They cannot be the same thing. They cannot be the same thing because they are in two different locations. They are not numerically identical, for sure. For sure. So now, then desantara katanyata. This means that only chetana and self are different. Now, not only chetana and self are different in their intrinsic nature, but they are also located in different places, like rupas in different kalapas. It means self and chetana are separable. Hence, the destruction of one does not lead to the destruction of the other. Yes, then this problem would not occur. But the problem is, according to this idea, the self can outlive chetana, so it is not necessary for the self to vanish when chetana disappears. However, according to this view, self becomes an entity that lacks intention. That's the point here, as they exist separately in a distinguishable manner. For example, the cloth which wraps the body of an animate being does not become animate just because it's connected to the animate being. Cloth is different from the animate being and it is distinguishable. In the same way, if self and chetana are not inseparable, not inseparable means separable, and exist as different entities, chetana is merely associated in the self and not an integral part of the self. Hence, under this view, self lacks the intention. That's the point here. It is not practical to consider something which lacks intention as self. So that's the Buddha's argument taken from Mahanidana Sutta. He referred it to as Sanya or Vedana, I forgot actually. And now this is being used in Abhidharma for for Chetana. Right. So this is the point. I'm not going to address the next point, which I was planning to do today actually, but we had a very deep, interesting analysis, so I'm satisfied about that. So next day I'm going to talk about how decisions are made. I'm not going to talk in detail because we'll be analyzing them later and in the course. Here, how Chetana is modified, or it means we call conditioned by various causes, and still possibility and the probability of making decisions, and how could this be overcome. This could be, because otherwise if we are talking about only conditionality, according to the role of the doctrine of causality, you cannot avoid determinism. That would eventually lead to determinism, which is a very dangerous path. So how do we analyze this and how do we understand this point? I'm not going to talk about in detail because it is a very interesting topic which needs more knowledge for us to talk about. Especially we have to discuss nama first before that. So, but still I'll be touching some points on that. So I also have an exam to attend in the institute. So I'll give you you can ask 2 questions. One person has two questions maximum, and I'll be closing the lecture. So I hope you enjoyed the lecture. So I open the forum for the discussion.
May I ask my question, sir?
Yes, sure.
My question is that earth and other material elements locatively support the mind and mind factors being an entity. So the earth and other materials elements locatively support mind and mind factors being an something like receptacle. Earth and other material being an receptacle locatively support mind and mind factors to be one entity or to be together. So my question is that when it comes to immaterial sphere, without that locative support, mind and mind factors remain together. I think it is because their mind is so powerful. That is my question. The powerfulness of the mind is can keep the remain together.
So you mean, thank you for your question. The mind and matter is held as a by the receptible nature of the Rūpas. That's what you mean, right? The Vattu Rūpas you mean, right?
Yeah, receptacle.
Receptacle.
Yes.
Receptacle, yes. Receptacle meaning. Yeah, thank you for the word actually. I didn't know that meaning. I just checked in the dictionary. Receptacle meaning, receptacle being a base, something like that. Something which receives, seems to be, right? So
Yes, I read this type of things in the 𝐕𝐈𝐓 𝐅𝐻
Atthakatha, okay.
Translated by Bhikkhu into English. 𝐕𝐈𝐴.
So does it say that, I'm not sure whether it need, in order to be combined, yes, it is a receptacle thing. The Vattu is a receptacle thing. It acts as a receptacle surface. But did it mention that the namas, the mentalities needs the support of such receptacle body or matter to be combined with each other? Is it? I don't think that's a necessary part, because mentalities are they themselves connected. Even in the Arupa realm, I don't think that they need this support to arise. Yes, obviously, because they are too weak. But the receptacle support is not for mentalities to come into combination. Is it how it was mentioned by Bhikkhu Bodhi? Was it?
Yes, it is. Now, in that book, it is mentioned as that receptacle support is they are available there. Not it's not necessarily it is necessary. No,
it's available, but your argument was for their exist. You are talking about how could nama exist without the receptacle entity in Arupa realm, or how could they exist how could they mix with each other? What was the question actually?
Question is that without the receptacle support, whether the mind and mental factors remain.
Okay, right. Yes, it cannot remain in normally it cannot, because it's weak. It's immaterial, so it's weak actually. So that's how we have to understand it. It's weak. Chitta is weak. It cannot exist without the body. That weakness is elaborated actually. So and only after mind is developed to a higher level in meditation, and that meditation brings a life in a different realm, in a particular realm. The mind could exist without the receptacle elements there. It could exist there without that. So that is just by the power of meditation. Herukane Chandrimala Mahanayaka Thera, if my memory was correct, had given a simile. The clay you put into water would dissolve, but when you make a pot out of that clay and burn it and prepare it properly, even you put it into water, it will still withstand, it will not get dissolved. So the same clay, when prepared very well, could withstand the liquid water, stand inside the water. So in the same way, when the consciousness is developed to a higher level, it could exist without the matter. That's the point. That is because of the development of meditation, concentration, meditation, spiritual factors. Just because of that. Okay, I think I'll close the class because I also have to attend the examination hall. Wish you all the best and hope you enjoy the talk. And next week we are going to talk a very deep discussion about how decisions are made. Then we move on to talk about rupas related to consciousness, and we can conclude the chitta rupas, which will lagged a lot, which we were like taking a long time, and we can then move on to utthaja rupas. So with this merit of discussing Dhamma, may all of us be able to attain the liberation soon, and may this help for the sustaining of the Buddha Sasana. Buddha Sasanang Chirantittatu, Buddha Sasanang Chirantittatu, Buddha Sasanang Chirantittatu, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.